There's a shot in Frieren that doesn't seem like much. It is literally only a conversation.
僕にとっては大切な仲間から預かった大事なものなんだ。いつか君にこうして返すべきものだったんだ。
And Frieren is perhaps confused by this. For her,
そんな大層なものじゃないんだけどな。
And as the bird flies away with the artifact, the camera slowly pans to the ground. The frame gets unblurred. And now, in the middle of the frame is the statue of the hero party. Frieren slowly walks towards it. And here, you can only listen to her footsteps. And in the next shot, Frieren is looking up at the statue. In fact, she is looking into a memory. It's a moment to take in, to absorb. And that's why there isn't a scope for any dialogue to interrupt her at this moment. It's intentional, it's simple. It's a form of storytelling that emphasizes a truthful side of life. Although everything here is set in the world of the fantastical, this story cares. This anime cares about those little things. And when I say little things, I don't just mean the story, I'm talking about the anime as a whole. There is a desire to focus on the fine details of all the components that create a visual story, stuff that gives life to a story. And I want to start out with something that is very much perceptible even on the first watch, the pacing. To put it simply, pacing is the tempo of a story. A story can go quick, or it can be slow. But pacing has the power to dictate how the audience feels about the narrative. If you could plot the emotions of the audience against the immersion of the story, pacing is the tool that you would adjust to align the two variables. And in Frieren, it is one of those aspects that pulls you in. You see, every story has a structure, a sort of guidance which enables the storyteller to tell an effective story. And although in theory, there are different approaches that you could take to tell your story, almost all of the films that you watch utilize what is called the 3-act structure of storytelling. At first, you have the setup, where you introduce an inciting incident. After the introduction is in order, this is where the story actually begins. And as the act progresses, the narrative reaches the threshold, a point of no return. Somewhere into the midpoint of the story, you come across the confrontation. This is where the build-up happens, the region where the stakes are raised and decisions have to be made within the plot. And as the narrative reaches the boiling point, it crosses over to the third act, the resolution. This is the point where everything comes together, the point where the problems get resolved, and where the story, be it happy or sad, gets the ending it deserves. And almost all stories, be it animation or live action, it basically follows this structure. But the reason why I brought up this narrative model is to emphasize how pacing impacts the structure. You see, at any given point on this graph, the pacing is what moves the story along this line. The duration of the 3 acts, the way it is structured, they're all correlated to this literary device. Which brings us to the pacing in Frieren. You see, the 3-act structure is a bit weird in this anime, and I want to show you this using an example. In the 3rd episode called Killing Magic, the narrative revolves around something called Zoltarag, the killing magic in question. But unlike the typical story structure, the episode takes its time to get there. Normally, the structure of such an episode would go like this. In the 3rd episode of Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, Father Cornello is introduced in the 1st act as a person who is capable of resurrecting the dead. Having seen this firsthand, the Elric brothers are intrigued and skeptical about this ability. So in the 2nd act, they investigate the matter to the point where the story crosses the threshold. Now they are deep into the narrative. And in the 3rd and final act, the brothers reveal the lies of Father Cornello to the people of the city, and he is defeated. There's a bit of extra stuff at the end, but as a well-contained episode, the 3-act structure works here pretty well. But now take a look at what happens in Frieren's episode. Both of these episodes are vaguely the same size, but here in the 1st act, there is no mention of the villain at all. In fact, the story doesn't even take place in the location they're supposed to face the villain. For almost the entire first half of the episode, it feels like Frieren and Fern are part of a different episode. There is no mention of this killing magic. From the perspective of the title, the 3-act structure only starts to make sense halfway into the story. Almost 13 minutes into the episode, we get a monologue from a villager about Kual, the villain in this episode. The setup takes us to the 2nd act, where Frieren explains this killing magic to Fern. This leads to the final act, where Kual is defeated by Frieren and the narrative comes to a conclusion. But notice how the 3-act structure only takes up less than half of this whole episode. It's almost like these were 2 different episodes combined into one. Even after the villain is defeated, the episode still has a bit more runtime that focuses on those little things that you won't normally find in other narrative structures. The whole episode has a unique pacing that modifies the typical story structure that you find in visual storytelling. And I think this is intentional. So why would they combine and modify these narrative models that are well established in storytelling? Why fix something that isn't broken? You see, this is where the character of Frieren comes in. Unlike the other characters in the show, Frieren is for all intents and purposes, at least from the perspective of the mere mortals, an eternal being. And it just happens so that for an elf who lives a long life, time passes differently. The perception of time, the process of aging, and even things like the passage of seasons, these elements are perceived by Frieren at a different rate than the average human. And so, the pacing and how it dictates the structure of the story is also defined by Frieren's perspective. And for Frieren, this interaction might as well be just another interaction with a demon. For after all, she was the one who sealed this demon in the first place. And in her journeys, she must have encountered countless entities similar to Kual. And for her, in a weird way, this is just business as usual. If we were seeing this from Fern's perspective, the structure of this episode might be a bit more concise. Similar to this episode from Fullmetal Alchemist, maybe the villain would have been introduced in the first few minutes of the episode. The whole episode would have been a quest to defeat Kual. The fight would have lasted longer and the story would have still made sense. But for Frieren's story, strangely enough, it's the little things that surround the plot that matters. In the 15th episode titled Smells Like Trouble, the narrative follows a similar structure. But this time, the adventurers come across an inciting incident pretty quickly. The narrative builds up from here to the point of no return as Frieren falls asleep to the sleeping curse. And you could very well define the 3rd act as Frieren waking up from her slumber to eviscerate the Chaos Flower. This could be a well-contained episode in and of itself if we weren't only 10 minutes into this episode. And the rest of the episode is completely different to the story structure of the first half. Now we're dealing with a different kind of quest. And overall, these sort of things shouldn't matter to the plot. The second half of the episode is not entirely necessary, but if you slow the pacing down to Frieren's perspective, it makes sense that it does. From her perspective, the adventure is not meant to be concise to the plot. It would naturally deviate from it, and hence these little things add to the character of the story. But an intentionally slowed down story is often driven by its characters. You pick a movie and analyze the pacing. More often than not, the slower the pacing of the narrative, the more character focused is the story. In movies like Shawshank Redemption or an anime like Neon Genesis Evangelion, the plot exists as a means to comprehend the inner struggles and motivations of the characters, and as such, the pacing is slowed down to understand the individual rather than the bigger picture. And it's not that Frieren doesn't have an interesting plot, it does indeed have one. But it is a type of fantasy that emphasizes on these characters significantly more than the plot. And so the little things are sprinkled all over it. And to see this in action, you don't need to look any further than its main character. The story is told in such a way that you get 2 versions of Frieren. The lazy and distant elf from the flashbacks to the one who tries her absolute best to rectify this persona in the present. It's a beautiful melee between her past and present, which the narrative sheds light on as the story progresses. In her past, Frieren struggled to understand the human outlook towards life, and more often than not, this comes off as a person who is indifferent to the people around her. But the people around her understands this about Frieren. They acknowledge the fact that Frieren is an elf, and her perspectives on life are therefore drastically different from that of humans. But slowly but surely, they teach her about the little things in life that makes life worth living. And even in these flashbacks, you can see the slow but detailed character development of Frieren. It's not to say that she stops questioning human decisions. It's not, after all, a smooth change of personality. She is flawed, and the more you observe, you see how she struggles to change her inner morals. It's a beautiful character study that involves a lot of patience and poise. But the moment Himmel the hero, the person she was attached to the most, passes away, without even realizing, she breaks down into tears. This is the first time Frieren realizes how much the 10-year adventure meant to her. All those little moments in the dangerous but wholesome adventure, those were the things that mattered the most. And from here forward, you see a different version of Frieren. Her character makes an effort to understand humanity much better. Even when it's an inconvenience or a struggle, she still tries to put herself into a human's shoe to see a different perspective on life. Frieren, who was opposed to taking up an apprentice, slowly changes her mind. Her views on human concepts like heaven are now viewed through an open mind. And the more the story moves on, the pacing and the structure allows the audience to appreciate the little things that Frieren does. At the start of the third episode, Frieren acts weird in front of Fern. You could see from her face that she was up to something, but not really sure as to why she was buying accessories and entering strange taverns becomes quite clear as they sit on a bench while having dessert, enjoying the view of a beautiful sunset. Frieren still doesn't fully understand Fern, but she makes sure that she remembered Fern's birthday, and it was not really about the quality of the gift or the meal. But from a rather simple human perspective, it's the thought that counts.
知ろうとしただけなのに。フリーレン様は本当に人の感情が分かっていませんね。
And over the course of her new adventure, there are countless moments where Frieren stops and pays attention to the people around her. When Cyan questions himself on whether or not he is an ideal role model, Frieren reminisces about a similar encounter that she had had with the priest Haite. And even though it's a simple gesture, Frieren praises Cyan in the same way she did for Haite. And it's quite silly how she carries out this gesture. She's almost like this innocent child trying to make someone happy through the playful attitude. But in it, there is something to smile about. And from a character's point of view, something else that becomes the essence of the show is the way gratitude permeates the root of the story. I just love the fact that every single character shows a level of appreciation to the people around them. Every single one of them is grateful for someone who came into their life to influence them in some way, shape or form. In the same episode, Fern is grateful to Frieren that she took time out of her life to buy her a birthday present. And this is not just conveyed through a simple exchange of dialogue, but it carries forward through Fern's actions. Notice how Fern wears the butterfly hair clip that Frieren gifted her for the rest of the series. There are times when she gets annoyed by Frieren's lack of responsibility and her carefree attitude, but still, she is grateful that Frieren took her as an apprentice. And as time progresses, she learns to find joy in the little things that Frieren does.
きっと私はそんなフリーレン様の姿が好きだから一緒に魔法を追い求めているんだと思います。
Stark is grateful to Eisen for never giving up on him. Cyan is grateful to his childhood friend and later on to Frieren's party for nudging him along the path of adventure. Old Man Vol is grateful for the time he got to spend with his late wife, that he protects her village on an unforgotten promise. And even some of the side characters who are insignificant to the overall plot shows an appreciation for the people who make their life a little bit easier. People are aware of the world that they live in. It is honest and real, and therefore, when someone offers you a hand of help, you appreciate them. Whether it be a villager or an adventurer passing by, a noble or the working class, they all show gratitude in a way that not even time can erase. Even if it is a small gesture, the way some of the townspeople cherish the statue of the heroes even long after they are gone shows that people in this world are genuine. The gratitude is not an act of pretension, it comes from a place of respect and admiration. Gratitude is indeed a little thing in life, but it truly does travel beyond the bounds of time and existence.
ホルジーの記憶も私が未来に連れて行ってあげるからね。
And these little details don't just stop at the pacing and characters, it is embedded into the world building too. Although there are aspects of Frieren that would make you feel like it's a well-established world, it is in fact a soft world building, but that doesn't come at the detriment of one's immersion. In fact, if you have watched the entire series, you would have sensed this element of immersion at every corner. But how do you make this happen? How do you develop a soft world building that has all the right feelings of a well-detailed world building in fantasy? You do this. Sound design is one of those things that when done right is hardly palpable. It's all about picking the right music or sound effects to describe the emotion of a moment. Other literary devices play into this, but for the most part, sound design is what makes a scene into an experience. The second episode in Frieren begins with a beautiful frame. Frieren and Fern are sitting on a rock and they seem to be fishing. They're also having a conversation in between, discussing Fern's progress as a novice mage. And it's quite natural for the viewers to pay attention to this conversation. At this point in the story, Frieren's character is only beginning to understand how empathy works in teaching. Because after all, Fern is Frieren's first and only apprentice. And the subtle change in her body language upon seeing Fern's gloomy face is something that shows the audience that Frieren does care about Fern. But all the while this happens, you might fail to acknowledge the authenticity of the location in which the conversation takes place. And that's a good thing, because it means that you were immersed in the experience. Now, if you listen to it carefully, you can hear the ambience of the environment, the sound of the flowing water, the chirping of birds, the fine details of sound that elevates the familiarity of the scene. You see, fantasy is not about packing your story with all kinds of fictional elements. At some point, you gotta connect with the audience. I don't want to be hit with fantastical elements one after the other. I want to feel a level of escapism while experiencing the storyline. And in the absence of a well laid out world building, intelligent sound design is a surefire way to achieve that feeling. And the more I watch Frieren and feel its sound designs, the more this world feels akin to Studio Ghibli. If you have been watching this channel for a while, you would know that I love talking about the soundscapes of Ghibli and how it gives their worlds a sense of personality. And it's a similar sense of love that I feel for these landscapes. In the same episode, the adventure takes Frieren and Fern to the Turk region, where an elderly lady asks them for some help. They walk together in what is seemingly a forested region before arriving in front of a statue of Himmel the hero. And I love how subtle the sound design is in this scene. You can barely hear the ambient sounds, but nevertheless, it has a place in this environment. So I isolated the sounds from the conversation, and this is what it sounds like without it.
フリーレン様、花畑を出す魔法使えましたよね。そうだね。何か適当な花でも。
And this is what it sounds like with the ambience.
フリーレン様、花畑を出す魔法使えましたよね。そうだね。何か適当な花でも。
Notice how the fine layer of sound adds multiple layers to the immersion. And if I could play some of these medieval musical compositions without running into copyright issues, trust me, I would be playing it right now. The sounds and music are very much complementary most of the time. There is no overuse of one over the other. There is a clear distinction in the use of ambient sound or music based on what's appropriate for a scene. And that's how you make a soft world building feel immersive. The fine detail of sound design takes it to a higher level of fantasy. But now that I've covered the crux of these smaller details, I want to touch upon my personal favorite aspect of it. The little things in life do happen when you take a deep breath. A visual story is told through frames. They combine to make sense of everything that you perceive on the screen. And more often than not, you want these frames to be smooth. You want to go through them at a nice comfortable pacing so that the audience doesn't stop paying attention. But sometimes, the storytellers intentionally leave a frame or so a little bit longer than it needs to be. There are scenes where almost nothing happens from a plot point of view. These are frames that only exist to give life to a scene. And I know this is not just a Frieren thing. In Japanese, there is even a word for it, ma, the space in between things. This is a recurrence in the stories of Studio Ghibli, where the character is caught in this beautiful moment of reflection, or where the entire movie just seems to take a break to build moments that you can relate to. After all, even fictional stories need to be relatable. And in the world of Frieren, these moments are precious. It's the way Frieren the elf lives her life, and you can see how it defines the story. When Frieren and Fern are searching for the blue moon flowers, there are moments with no dialogue. Some of the shots are deliberately held for a little longer. Notice how slow and methodical the overall scene is as a result. This sequence could have easily been captured with much less information. Frieren decides to follow the rat. They find a magical trail. Fern asks Frieren why she collects magical spells. The flashback, which then fades into the destination. This would have been quite enough to convey the story, but instead we get these extra frames that fills the gap in between. There is a filler shot where you don't even see the characters. It's just the camera panning down over a few branches within the ambient sounds of the forest. Another shot where Fern struggles to cross a stream, which reminds you that she is still a child after all. An extreme close-up frame where you can see Frieren offering a helping hand to Fern. This is such a good example of showing you that Frieren is guiding Fern exactly how she promised Haite, without actually telling you how. And even the shot that comes after, where the focus is on their boots, is such a unique choice of frame that doesn't really need to be there, but still, it adds a touch of personality to this sequence. There's another scene when Frieren and Fern are watching a sunrise. Frieren thinks the sunrise is pretty, but not anything to lose her sleep over. But all of a sudden, it hits her. And notice how the next frame is an extreme close-up of Frieren's mouth. It's used to put focus on her smile, the realization that Fern was the reason why she could see that sunrise. It's a very simple detail in the grand scheme of things. It's not that Frieren would now want to come back and see the sunrise every year, but rather it shows her appreciation for this simple gesture, an insignificant moment in time. It shows that Frieren is beginning to understand humanity. In Frieren's conversation with Old Man Vole, something similar happens. Because of old age, Old Man Vole is senile and his memories are slowly fading. At this stage of his life, he doesn't quite remember the affairs of the outside world, and so he doesn't remember that the Demon King had already been defeated. But as soon as he says that, notice how the frame captures Frieren's confusion. The camera then switches to Frieren's perspective. And as soon as we focus back on Frieren, she's about to tell him that the Demon King had already been defeated. But she doesn't quite complete the sentence. She pauses. The frame stays still, and a gentle night breeze caresses Frieren's hair. And then the confusion slowly turns into a smile as she realizes the frailty in her friend's mind. She could have told the truth, but she chooses not to. Maybe because she realized that the Demon King might have been the unknown reason why Old Man Vole was still protecting the village, and she doesn't want Old Man Vole to lose his sense of purpose at his old age. The scene is a character study. The composition of the art, the pacing of the frames, even the usage of silence here is a method in portraying the mind of a character rather than telling you what it exactly is. It's a clear moment of dallying where nothing important happens. But still, the scene is something to be absorbed, not fully explained. Things like watching a sunset or crossing a bridge or even someone patting you on the head. These are all moments in real life that are technically unnecessary for survival, but yet we value them. We value them because they make our lives a little bit easier to live. It is only natural to live that way, so portray them whenever you can. Fantasy doesn't always have to be about the sheer volume of stereotypes thrown in your face over and over again. It can still work incredibly well if you bring a sense of familiarity within the escapism. Evoke the right emotion at the right moment. You talk about morals, you got that covered as well. Whether it be the characters or the pacing or the sound design or even moments to take in a deep breath, they come together to create immersion. And I think that's why people rate this anime so highly. This is an anime that does fantasy the right way, an anime that cares about the little things.